Something happened quietly, in the early hours of a morning that most of the world slept through. A ceasefire was announced. Diplomats smiled for cameras. Words like de-escalation and diplomatic progress flooded the headlines. And for about 48 hours, people actually believed it. They believed that the guns had stopped, that the pressure had lifted, that maybe just this once, the adults in the room had figured something out. They hadn't. Because here's what a ceasefire actually is in the Middle East, and specifically between forces connected to Iran and the Western allied coalition pressuring them. It's not peace, it's a pause. And a pause is not the same thing as peace. The same way holding your breath is not the same thing as being calm. The tension is still there. The strategy is still running. The clock is still ticking. The ceasefire was simply the most convenient story for everyone involved to tell at that exact moment. So let's talk about what's really going on. On the surface, here's what you're being told. Iran agreed to terms. Mediators, likely involving Qatar, Oman, or some combination of European diplomats, brokered a framework for reducing hostilities. The United States signaled cautious approval. Israel remained publicly skeptical but didn't immediately reject it. And the Iranian government, through its foreign ministry, issued statements about sovereignty and dignity being respected. That's the version everyone agreed to show you. But look at the edges of that story. Look at what happened within hours of the ceasefire being declared. Iranian-backed forces in Yemen, the Houthis, launched another drone swarm toward the Red Sea shipping corridor. Hezbollah in Lebanon didn't stand down its alert posture. And inside Iran itself, the Revolutionary Guard, which is a military force that answers not to the elected president, but to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, made no public statement of compliance, not one word. So who exactly agreed to this ceasefire, and who was never going to honor it in the first place? That question right there is the entire story. Here is the first thing you need to understand about Iran's power structure, because it is unlike almost any other government on earth. Iran runs what political analysts call a dual-state system. You have the elected government, the president, the foreign minister, the people who meet with diplomats and sign papers, and then you have the parallel state, the supreme leader, the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and what Iran calls the axis of resistance, which is a network of armed groups across the Middle East that Iran funds, trains, and directs. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. When Western governments negotiate with Iran, they are almost always talking to the first government. But the decisions that actually move on the ground are made by the second one. The Revolutionary Guard doesn't hold press conferences. It doesn't show up at a table in Geneva. And it has never, in its entire history, agreed to a ceasefire that meaningfully constrained its operations. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented, recorded architecture of how Iranian foreign policy actually functions. And understanding it means you immediately see why every Iran ceasefire in recent memory has fallen apart within days or weeks of being announced. To understand why this structure even exists, you have to go back to 1979. That year, a revolution happened in Iran that the world still hasn't fully processed. The Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who had been installed with heavy American and British backing after a CIA-organized coup in 1953. That's 1953, not a theory, a confirmed historical fact, was overthrown. The revolutionaries were not a single group. They were a coalition of leftists, Democrats, socialists, and religious conservatives, all united by one thing: hatred of the Shah and his foreign backers. But after the revolution, one faction outmaneuvered all the others. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's religious conservatives took control, and they built a state specifically designed to never be vulnerable to foreign interference again. The supreme leader concept was built into the constitution. The Revolutionary Guard was created specifically as a parallel military that would be loyal to the revolution's ideology, not to any elected civilian government. The whole structure was built to be immune to exactly the kind of external pressure that toppled the Shah. And then came 1980. Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran with quiet Western backing because the new Iranian government terrified everyone in the region and in Washington. That war lasted 8 years. 1 million people died. Iran was hit with chemical weapons. The West looked away, and at the end of it, the Revolutionary Guard emerged not as a wounded institution, but as the most powerful military political organization in the country, battle-hardened, deeply ideological, and deeply convinced that no external power had Iran's interests at heart. That trauma is still running the decision-making today. Every time you see Iran appear to negotiate and then fail to follow through, you are watching the legacy of 1980 express itself in real time. Now here is where this gets more complicated, and this is the part that most coverage completely misses. The ceasefire isn't just about Iran and America, or Iran and Israel. There is a third player whose influence over this entire situation is enormous, largely undiscussed, and whose interests don't actually align with peace being stabilized in a clean, verifiable way. That player is China. China has become Iran's largest trading partner after Western sanctions crushed Iran's ability to sell oil on the open market. China stepped in and became the primary buyer of Iranian crude at discounted prices, yes, but consistently. And at volume. In 2023, a deal was signed, a 25-year cooperation agreement between China and Iran, covering energy, infrastructure, and security cooperation. 25 years. That is not a transactional relationship. That is a structural realignment. Why does that matter for the ceasefire? Because China has no interest in a stable, verified, Western-supervised peace framework in the Middle East that would remove sanctions on Iran, reintegrate Tehran into the global financial system, and allow Iranian oil to flow back to European and Asian markets at competitive prices. A sanctions-free Iran doesn't need China's discounted lifeline. A sanctions-free Iran has options. And an Iran with options is an Iran that might drift back toward Western economic integration. So China, which publicly positions itself as a peacemaker and mediator. Remember when Beijing brokered the Saudi-Iran normalization deal in 2023, is playing a game where the appearance of diplomatic progress serves its image, while the actual resolution of the conflict would hurt its leverage. A frozen conflict, managed but never solved, where Iran remains isolated and dependent on Beijing, is actually China's preferred outcome, and the ceasefire already breaking apart delivers exactly that. Let's talk about how the money actually works, because this is where the real mechanics of the situation become visible. Iranian oil, under sanctions, doesn't just disappear. It moves through what traders call a shadow fleet, hundreds of tankers that operate without standard insurance, that turn off their tracking transponders, and that move oil from Iranian ports to intermediary locations, often in Malaysia, the UAE, or Chinese territorial waters, where it gets relabeled and sold onward. This system processes somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million barrels of Iranian oil every single day. At even a conservative estimate of $60 a barrel, that's close to $120 million flowing through unofficial channels daily. That money goes somewhere. Some of it funds the Iranian state budget, some of it funds the Revolutionary Guard's operations, and a significant portion funds the axis of resistance, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq, the military infrastructure of a proxy network that operates across 4 countries is not cheap. Hezbollah alone has an estimated annual budget of somewhere between $700 million and $1 billion. The Houthis have acquired ballistic missiles, drones, and anti-ship weapons sophisticated enough to close one of the world's most critical trade routes, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which roughly 12% of global trade passes. That's not rogue militias scraping by. That's a funded, supplied, strategically directed military ecosystem. And a ceasefire that doesn't address the money doesn't stop the ecosystem, it just makes it quieter for a little while. Now let me bring this home for someone sitting in a country that has nothing to do with any of this. Someone in Nigeria, or Brazil, or Vietnam, who looked at the headline and thought, okay, ceasefire good, and moved on. Here's why you cannot move on. The Houthis' campaign in the Red Sea has already diverted a significant portion of global shipping away from the Suez Canal route. Ships that used to travel from Asia to Europe through the Red Sea are now going around the Cape of Good Hope, adding anywhere from 10 to 20 days to each journey, and significantly increasing fuel and insurance costs. That cost doesn't stay with the shipping companies. It moves into the price of goods, electronics, clothing, food, medicine. The inflation you feel in your local market, not all of it, but some of it, has a thread that leads back to a drone launched from Yemen, and the broader conflict between Iran and the Western coalition is sitting directly on top of the world's most important energy corridor, the Strait of Hormuz. The narrow waterway between Iran and Oman is where approximately 20% of all the world's oil passes through. 20%. If that strait closes, even temporarily, oil prices spike globally within 72 hours. Everything that runs on oil, or is made with oil, or is transported using oil, gets more expensive simultaneously everywhere. This is not a regional conflict. It is a conflict that has its hand on the throttle of the global economy. And every time a ceasefire collapses, the world gets one step closer to an incident that tips from managed tension into actual escalation. Iran knows this. That's why the Strait of Hormuz is never far from Iranian officials' mouths when they feel economically squeezed. It's their ultimate leverage card. The threat doesn't even need to be acted on to be effective. Just reminding the world that they could act on it is enough to influence oil futures markets, insurance premiums, and Western political calculations. The ceasefire, then, is partly about managing that threat. If things look calm enough, oil markets relax, shipping insurance rates come down slightly, Western politicians can point to the situation and say they managed it. But the fundamental pressure hasn't changed. The leverage hasn't gone away. And the Revolutionary Guard is still doing what it was doing before the ceasefire was announced, just more quietly. There's one more layer to this that I want you to sit with. Inside Iran, the population is exhausted. There have been massive protests. The 2022 uprising, sparked by the death of Mahsa Amini, revealed just how deep the fractures between the Iranian government and its own people run. Young Iranians, who make up the majority of the population, the median age in Iran is around 32, did not build the revolution of 1979. They inherited it, and many of them want no part of a system that has kept them economically strangled and diplomatically isolated for 45 years. The government's calculation is this: external conflict, or the perception of external threat, is the most reliable tool for suppressing internal dissent. When the enemy is at the gate, you don't protest the general. And so a sustained low-grade conflict with the West and with Israel serves the regime's domestic survival, even as it costs the Iranian people enormously. A genuine peace, real normalization, sanctions lifted, Iran reintegrated into the global economy, would be a massive gift to ordinary Iranians. And it would also remove one of the government's most powerful tools for controlling them, which is exactly why the people who actually hold power in Tehran will never fully commit to it. The ceasefire was a story, a useful one for a specific moment. The talks are real in the sense that people met and words were exchanged. But words are not architecture, and the architecture of this conflict, the money, the proxy networks, the dual-state power structure, the Chinese economic interest in managed isolation, the domestic political calculus of a government that needs an enemy, none of that was dismantled, none of it was even seriously addressed. What you're watching is not the end of something, it's the middle of something that has been unfolding for decades, pausing and restarting, wearing different costumes in different seasons. The real question isn't whether this ceasefire holds. You already know the answer to that. The real question is whether any of the players involved, Washington, Tehran, Beijing, Riyadh, Tel Aviv, actually want the conflict to end, or whether they've each found a way to profit, politically or economically, from keeping it alive. Because sometimes the fire is the point.